Thank you, Denise, and good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
All right. Now, a couple things. I'm going to introduce my distinguished panel members up here in just a minute. Ms. Mandy Ballou is the training director for CEF in Alaska, and Mandy's going to come up and talk about how they are working with high school programs and community colleges to help fill that skills gap that they're facing in Alaska. And then Mr. Ralph Mora will also be coming up to talk about what is happening in New Mexico. And so I think you'll find our discussion today very interesting. So, question to all of you, and show by raise of hands, how many of you all went to high school? Okay, very good. How many of you all took a career and technical education class? Okay. For those, keep your hands up, keep your hands up, keep your hands up. For those of you that did not take a career and technical education class, did you take a vocational education class? Okay. How many of you all took typing in high school? Okay, a lot more hands went up. So guess what? You are part of the family for career and technical education. And so what we're going to talk about today is what does that look like and how can you all be actively engaged in career and technical education. I'm going to give you a little bit overview of what we do and how CTE really is affecting this pipeline, this skills gap. Now, how many contractors are in the audience? Okay, tell me this, contractors, are you worried about the skills gap? Okay, are you worried about the skills gap in 2 years? Or are you worried about the skills gap that's happening now? Okay, now. So what we really need to look at is how do we address these issues? So as we move along with our presentation, we've got our learning objectives here. And so what we're going to look at is what are those steps to connect industry and education? We're going to look at the common elements for successful industry and education partnership. And then I really want you to think about this last statement here, which is, what is this purpose statement that you're going to have to go to work with education? Why do you need young men and women to come into the industry, not only from the high school programs, but from those post-secondary technical college programs? I'm going to talk a little bit our NCCER programs that we have. For those of you that are not familiar with NCCER, we are a nonprofit organization that is directed for helping educate and work with the construction industry to make it a safer, better trained workforce. And so if you want to find out more information about NCCER, or you are familiar with it or you're not, just come by our table, which is located over by the resource or the registration desk. I'd be happy to talk to you a little bit more about it. But what I want to talk about is how do we as education look at these areas that we need. So industry needs, I'm just going to briefly go over these real quick. We know that in the next, between now and 2020, there's going to be a 1 million worker deficit. And we know that some of those areas are carpentry, masonry, pipe fitters, heavy equipment operators, electricians, and welders. But that's not to say that we're not also missing those professional jobs that are out there. And how do we get these people engaged? So I think that if you really think about what we're looking at, there are more people that we need for those areas. Now, are those areas that you're searching for people right now? They are, okay? One of the things about this presentation, it would be very helpful, it's an interactive presentation, so it would be very helpful if you interacted with me when we go through this. So we're going through this again. Are those areas you all are looking for? Yes, thank you very much, I appreciate that. Now, what are some of those areas that we can help you with? So, career and technical education. If you really think about what career and technical education can do as this pipeline coming in, skilled trades are the hardest jobs to fill in the United States. As we start looking at this, 81% of dropouts that left high school said real work, real learning opportunities would have kept them in high school. That's what CTE does. It helps students understand what real-world activities there are out there. The average high school graduation rate for a student who is a concentrator in a career and technical education program is 93%, compared to that of the average of 80% for those that are not a CTE concentrator. So what I'm talking about, a concentrator, is a student who has taken 2 or more career and technical education courses within a pathway of study. And it's very important. Remember that word pathways, because I'm going to come back to that in a little while and let you understand how NCCER resources for setting up pathways is going to be very beneficial for you. Now, the benefits of CTE. I've talked a little bit more about them, but it helps reduce dropout prevention. It helps better prepare students for careers, and it's helping the unemployment rate. So there's a little graph up here that talks about traditional vocational education versus career and technical education. And I think the biggest bullet in that is the simple fact that career and technical education is for all students. A few years ago, it used to be vocational education were for those students that weren't going to be successful in college. Now, we've all heard that everybody, according to high school counselors and some administrators, that every student needs to go to fill in the blank, college, to be successful. Tend to disagree with that. 2012, Harvard University put together the Pathways to Prosperity study. How many of you have heard of the Pathways to Prosperity study? Okay. Pathways to Prosperity study was released, and guess what it said? Not every student needs to go to college to be successful. And it caught a lot of people's ears because it was from Harvard. If Harvard said it, it must be right, correct? So one of the things that we took on as an initiative for career and technical education and connecting business and industry in a Pathways initiative. And what we did, we basically took the Pathways idea and said, we need to concentrate on the construction industry. For us to make this connection between education and industry, we have to be the leaders in this. So what we did, we put together a whole series of information. So there's a website, pathways.nccr.org. I would advise you to go there because it really has helpful information for you to work with schools in your local area. How many of you all have a partnership with a secondary high school program or a community college? Okay, that's a very good opportunity. Now, within your area that you're working in, there's an opportunity for you to expand that area of influence a little bit more. And what we've developed on this is a connections map. And up here you'll see all the little red and green and yellow dots. And this map is available for you to put your contact information on there. So if you are a chapter member and you have all of your, if you're a chapter and you have all your members that are available that want to put information on here, this is an opportunity for them to connect and reach out to schools in their area. All we're asking you to do is to put your information on there, your company, who your contact is at your particular school or particular industry, and what you would be willing to help schools with. And then also on there are schools that are putting information on there. They are wanting your support. They want your help. And they're putting that same type of information on there. And so I really want to encourage you all to go there, put your information on there, and let us help you make those connections. That's part of our goal for this coming year, is to make sure that these connections are made and that they are lasting connections. The other part you'll see on here is tips for building an effective advisory board. And this is really how do you take it to the next level? How do you as industry sit back and look at how to make connections and be on advisory boards to make sure that what's going on in those schools is what you need within your area? Because far too many times we see career and technical education programs do what is easy for the teacher, not necessarily what's good and what is needed within the industry. So now is your opportunity to reach out to those schools, get on those advisory boards, form those partnerships, and really start looking and analyzing what is that purpose statement. The speaker at the 10 o'clock or 9:30 presentation was talking about the purpose of getting more people, more leaders into the industry. And so now is your opportunity to influence this younger group of leaders. So what is that purpose statement that you're going to go back? So if you look at the ninth step is developing a marketing strategy for your program. How are you going to get out and market this program? How are you going to invest in career and technical education? So we look at this map and you'll see some red dots on there. Now red dots represent an organization that some of you may be very familiar with. Skills USA. How many of you are familiar with what Skills USA is? Okay. Skills USA is, for those of you that do not know, Skills USA is the largest student career and technical organization. You will find the best of students that participate in this club. A couple facts about Skills USA. There are 16 career clusters that are divided by the Department of Education, Department of Labor. Architecture and construction is just one of them. There's out of the 16. Skills USA right now has 51,358 members in the architecture and construction cluster. So think about that for a minute. How many of those students that are in an architecture and construction class that are bought into career and technical education could be the next hire that you go after? So if you're wanting to find out more and getting involved with Skills USA, which as a matter of fact has a total of 295,000 members in secondary and post-secondary education across the United States. So you talk about an area to fill the skills gap, connect with those schools, connect with those Skills USA programs, and you'll be very surprised at what you see. Make sure that you look at the connections map. Make sure that you think about the importance of career and technical education. The last thing I want to say before I turn this over to Mr. Mora first to talk about what's going on in New Mexico, it's a simple fact that NCCER right now is training students in about 2,000 training locations across the United States. NCCER is about 6,500 training locations all over the United States. So about a third of those are high school or technical colleges that are doing very specific industry recognized credentialing training. And I want to make sure that you all realize that. And you can look and see that on that map, you can find those areas. You can also contact us and we'll be very happy to help make that connection for you. Make sure that you start looking at those schools as those viable options. Now, Ralph's going to come up here and he's going to talk about AGC New Mexico, what they're doing, how they're working with schools, and how they're working with their post-secondary programs. And we'll come back at the end after Mandy does her presentation, and we'll take questions. And so a lot of the latter part of this is really going to be you asking us questions and how can we assist you to make sure that we're making those connections for you. So Ralph?
Thank you, Dan. Good morning, everybody. As Dan said, my name is Ralph Mota with Associated General Contractors, New Mexico. Very glad to be here at the invite of NCCER to discuss what we're doing out in New Mexico. We have a unique environment in the New Mexico area. Some of us affectionately call us the donut hole. When it comes to the economics and getting things done in New Mexico, we're always a little bit behind the drag, but we start coming up and getting things done. And in the education system, we're actually trying to do it the opposite direction to get prepared workforce for our members today. And a lot of it comes down to relationship building. So some of the relationships we've built in New Mexico over the past several years, first with the Association for Career and Technical Education, how many of you are familiar with ACTE, or Association for Career and Tech Ed, in your states and federally? That's one thing I'd like to encourage you to educate yourself on in your local region, is the Association for Career and Tech Ed. There's usually one in every state, if not more. I think Texas has a couple extra availabilities. But building a relationship with them really starts to develop your pipeline of knowing who's delivering the kind of training you need, and also it connects the industry for them on several reasons, for several values. One, it's the connection to industry for employment opportunities, but it also gives the industry a voice at the school level, at the educators level, on what kind of credentials you're looking for as an employer or as an association to get qualified workforce for your area. There's the state level, there's the national level. I encourage through both. At AGC New Mexico, we've done both. We've worked different levels, from the construction technologies and industry position at the state level, all the way up to something as simple as awards at the national level. It's starting to build that relationship. And now the relationship built in New Mexico, we've got schools contacting AGC on a regular basis on how to connect with our members, inviting us out to their schools to see what they're training their students to prepare for that workforce need in New Mexico. Also working closely, for us it's called PED, it's the New Mexico Public Education Department. I know every state has a little bit different name for their education departments, but that's also a very valuable relationship that we've built with AGC over the years, and I'm going back all the way to the 80s before I was working at AGC. That relationship started in the New Mexico area. And the value behind this is, of course, kind of connecting all the dots here is, one, the relationship building, for them knowing who to go to when we need information. One of the biggest challenges we hear from different schools is we don't know where to go, we don't know who to talk to. Are we hitting the mark on getting a prepared workforce for the membership, for the employers? A lot of schools rely on their traditional advisory boards. How many here are on advisory board at their local school levels? I don't know about you, but I've been to several of those school board advisories, and it seems like basically they want to come in and explain to you what they've been doing and how it's a value to you. There's some coffee and donuts on the side. Please enjoy. That's very non-interactive. You're not getting your message to them on what you're needing or seeing where the deficits are. They're telling you about their great works, and none of us ever want to say, no, that's not great work, that's not what we need, because we're trying to encourage the relationship. So working through the public education side, we found one of the values is being part of the conversation when it has to come with understanding how Perkins is allocated to the schools and what the Perkins are used for. And we've even helped change some of the language and the allocations in New Mexico to show that they have to leave to industry recognized credentials. How many people do I have here from post-secondary? Okay, so you guys don't need to meet me after this statement, okay? One of the challenges we've run into with some of the school districts, and this is where we work with PED and we work with Association for Career and Tech Ed, is understanding what credentials have value. Every school that puts a program together, yes, you're well-intentioned in doing a great job. But if I come to your school, if I go to Ajax University in New Mexico and I get a certificate of completion in their carpentry program, well, what does that mean when I head up to Montana or I head out to Alaska or New York? It doesn't carry a value or a weighted value when you leave that area. That's where the NCCER credentialing, anybody that's ever been in welding knows what AWS is. That's the exact same relationship we have with NCCER, and that's what we're trying to push with the owners. And that's where our communication with Public Education Department has started, helping them understand if they're in automotive, they need to leave with the ASAE certification. If they're in welding, AWS, and so on. So that's part of the relationship building going on. And now I'm excited to say Skills USA, I've known about it for years, but now at AGC New Mexico, we're actually sitting on the board to help guide what some of those challenges should look like to prepare the young people to get into the career. A lot of times in the Skills USA, the value of what they're training is just amazing. They didn't have Skills USA when I was in school. I wish I would have had that opportunity. But these young people, the leadership skills that they're leaving with is amazing. Going and talking and communicating with these young people is completely different. How many of you ever just take an opportunity to go visit a high school, any high school throughout your state? Have you had the opportunity to go to some that are in big cities and then go out to rural, whatever state you are, rural USA? I'll tell you, that was a huge eye-opener for me. I grew up in a small town south of Albuquerque. I'm used to rural lifestyle. Yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. And then you go into the more city-style schools, inner cities, and you don't get that same communication. You don't get that same kind of interaction. There's almost a disconnect. Well, where I grew up, we called it respect. So working with these different schools, now with Skills USA, getting more familiarized with some of the rural schools. And I'll tell you, these farm kids, those are going to be the future of the construction industry from my desk. We're actively chasing those young people that are been out on a tractor at 5 a.m. in the morning to go do some work out on the farm before they head to school, on the bus at 7 a.m. So those are the folks we're currently working with. And our Skills USA participants have stronger skills from those rural locations than most of our city participants do. Now, I'm not saying take away from the city folks, because I'm going after them young people too. If they're interested in the craft, right now there's such a deficit in getting the workforce in that we're trying to get everywhere. We're even starting to work much more closely with reservations in the New Mexico area to start building it. And it all starts with the education system. If we get them after they've dropped out, the remediation costs almost broke our apprenticeship program. We were spending more than 50% of our budget on basically teaching long division. So that's where these relationships started to build. Some of the tools we've used, and you'll notice it's very heavy with NCCER. When I first started with AGC New Mexico, that's where my relationship began. Actually, I met Don and Steve about 8-9 years ago before I even met the board of directors that hired me. And throughout that relationship and all those years in that career, the tools that they bring have helped make my job successful as far as I'm concerned in getting the messaging out, not having to reinvent the wheel. One of your biggest costs as an employer, of course, is going to be figuring out how are you going to do it. And with us utilizing the NCCER, I'm confident we don't have a dollar amount, has saved us several thousands of dollars, if not hundreds of thousands, on not having to go out and reinvent the wheel, to go out there and tell the schools and employers what's needed. We actually have a proven system that can be delivered. At our site, we are an accredited training sponsor, and we've recently become an accredited assessment center. But right now, we're working with 16 secondary and post-secondary, and I use the term direct here because we have a lot of schools that are using the colleges as a hub. So they're not working through us on their sponsorship side, so they're actually coming to these different schools as feeders, and they're getting their NCCER credentials through there. So over 30 schools we're working with indirectly on top of that. New Mexico is, I believe, geographically the 5th largest in the country. So we're actually glad that they're doing that, using it as a hub, because it would be impossible for us to cover the whole state to go do audits and reviews and check and see the school facilities, how they are. So we have extra master trainers throughout the state to actually cover some of those audits for us. The NCCER Accredited Assessment Center credentials that we just did, is anybody here utilizing the NCCER accreditations process for assessments? Only a couple. How many associations? I don't think I asked that question there. Are there association representatives here? 1, 2, 3, 4. Got a few. I will say this has been a helpful non-dues revenue source that we've started implementing at our association. One, it helps legitimize the work at the schools, goes back to the partnerships. Now we've started working with the schools to help them utilize the assessments as kind of a final exam, and it gives them leverage when they go talk to their administrative staff to say, look, we've got an outside entity validating our work and what the outcomes are. So right now, I'm going to actually embarrass one of my colleagues here. Mr. Joseph Montoya is here from New Mexico. He actually kind of grew up with the AGC family. He started out in our apprenticeship program, went on to become a certified craftsperson, owns a business now, went through credentialing process, became an instructor for us through our Luna Community College location. Now he's proctoring assessments, and all this through a heavy equipment operators program that now he's gotten independent on and now a member of AGC. So he's one of our great success stories that I like to pick on, but the value behind what's come out through these different relationships and through the NCCER credentialing process on the heavy equipment side is we're actually starting to put New Mexico on the map for our heavy equipment operators through this program, and it all kind of comes back on building those relationships. He's heading to any part of the state, he calls me up and I've got the connection. It starts to become this web, and I'll tell you, working with the education system and the political system is one sticky web. One of our pride and joys is ACE Leadership High School. We founded it in 2010. Right now we run pre-apprenticeship out of it. We have a bona fide pre-apprenticeship program that's through legislation that links the students to our apprenticeship program, all using the credentialed program. So not only do they leave with a certificate of pre-apprenticeship that gives them advanced credit within our apprenticeship program, which we represent 5 crafts at our location, they also leave with, of course, their NCCER credentials. Our re-engagement population is students that have dropped out of school in the traditional model. Going back to what Dan said about the 80% that have dropped out, if they had that real world experience, we're actually picking up those young people from age 16 to 24 to get them re-engaged into their education, and they leave with a diploma rather than a GED. We want them to get their completion. And again, many of those students, not all, we're actively working. I'm not greedy, I just want to brand every student that comes out of our school, but they're all going to get credentialed eventually, whether it's one module within the NCCER curricula or if it's leaving with a full a craft completion. And then of course, apprenticeship is the tie-in. That's our driver at AGC New Mexico to get the skilled workforce, of course, for the member. But that was the genesis, was through apprenticeship. We were one of the first open shop apprenticeship programs in the country in 1981. And part of that development is going back to what I said earlier. So much of our funding was going into reclamation work, getting young people that were either coming with a high school diploma or that were dropouts that couldn't do basic fractions, can't do basic long division. And we went through a whole culture change in this country where, no, you're going to college, you're not going to construction. Well, if you're not going to go to college and you dropped out of school, they'll pick you up in construction if you got a strong back and show up on time. Those days are done. Strong back showing up in time, those days are done. We need people that can be problem solvers, that can do the job, and I know I'm preaching to the choir on what's needed on a job site, but on a funny side note is I used to be a heavy equipment operator in the mid-90s when I was fresh out of high school. I got into a backhoe last year and I couldn't even start it. That just shows how the change in the construction profession has grown, and it makes it dang near impossible to get somebody that doesn't have basic skills, especially in mathematics. If they can't operate an email, they're already challenged coming into our industry. Some of the resources I put up here that are available, of course, the AGC of America Recruiting Task Force has put together valuable information for those of you that have never gone to their website. the workforce recruiting through industry educator partnerships. Of course, the NCCER Build Your Future website is very valuable for you if you're going out to schools and you're trying to cultivate young people. They have lots of resources, again, not going back and reinventing the wheel. The Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act. This has been a valuable tool. I don't know if you guys are, but tomorrow I'm going to that presentation on how to get access to those funds. But they've made a huge impact on both apprenticeship as well as the credentialing programs we have going on to get people ready for the employment. And then the commercial industries construction competencies model that AGC of America has. This tool has been great for us when we go to the schools to help them understand, because we have a huge challenge working with schools to get them to understand that our industry is not picking up the dropouts anymore. We need a strong applicant pool. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ralph. Ralph mentioned two things that I'd like to just touch on real quick. First off, our Build Your Future campaign. This is information and resources that are available for you to utilize to go out to recruit workers, high school, discharged and transitioning military personnel to come into your organization. As Ralph said, don't reinvent the wheel. BYF.org. Come by our table and we'll show you more information about that. The other thing Ralph mentioned was working with departments of education. Works very closely with the New Mexico Public Education Department. Every state has a career and technical education state department that sets standards for what is taught in their programs. My challenge to you is to reach out to those people in your state that make those decisions for career and technical education and be on those committees that start looking at what those standards are for the construction industry that need to be taught. Because without your voice, you won't be heard. So please do that. So now I'm going to turn this over to,
Can I ask you a quick question about that?
sure.
I have been working very closely with our state, and I think that we are all going, I agree completely with what you're saying, and the biggest frustration I have found working with these career and technology centers, and what we have got to get a grip on, is the fact that they're canceling construction trades programs in a lot of these schools, because they simply don't have the numbers. The kids don't want to come, and, you know, one of my big efforts last month was just getting them to not cancel bricklaying, but we changed it to be more of concrete finishing as opposed to bricklaying, because parents can, you know, find that more palatable. But this is a huge issue, and I just think we've all got to be very aware that if you're not in there, they are canceling our programs right and left, and it's really scary.
It is very scary, and that is where your voice needs to be heard. As Ralph said, if you're not sitting on an advisory board for the schools that for those of you that raised your hand and said that you worked with schools, if you're not sitting on those advisory boards to make sure that your voice is heard, that this is what we need in our industry, then yes, those programs are going to go away. Because as a former administrator, I can tell you, I can listen to my teachers tell me stuff all the time, and it's my teachers. But if I had industry knocking on my door saying, these programs need to be saved, these programs need to be funded, this is how we're going to do it, then I was going to sit up and listen. So yes, and we can talk about that in just a little bit, but I'm going to let Mandy come up and talk about what they're doing in Alaska.
Good morning. My name is Mandy Blue, and I am the training director for CEF in Alaska, tandem with the Associated General Contractors. So I'm just the education entity of that. I want to kind of run with what that lady just said in the back. I think we find that we have to turn youth on to construction, and I say that because we have to make it sexy for them. We have to give them language that they understand, and we have to get the idea of construction is using a shovel and you're digging a ditch, because they don't understand what construction is. And the teachers typically who are teaching it don't understand the jobs that they can get in the construction industry. So if the contractors are not in the classroom telling them what is needed telling them what types of careers they can have in construction, we're not going to get youth turned on to the idea of working with their hands. And understanding that they have to be tactilely inclined, but they also have to be able to use their brain. They need to know how to do math off the top of their head. You know, there are some times where they can write it out on a piece of drywall, but the contractor needs to make money and they need to be profitable. So if a student can't do that, then they're no use, you know. So it's kind of getting them turned on that they do have to be academically inclined and tactilely inclined. So, you know, we have to wrap our brain around how we introduce construction to youth. So I'm going to kind of a little off of that. But so AGC of Alaska, we are a training sponsor. We are endorsed by NCCER. I have 62 secondary and post-secondary schools that I work with throughout our state. So obviously Alaska's vast. We have a lot of schools that are not on road systems. So I do get to travel a lot and see what schools are offering. And when you talk about CTE in high schools, you typically, okay, they're in a wood shop class. Well, that's not the case. We have electrical programs. We have your general idea of carpentry. We have plumbing. We have heavy equipment operation. We have diesel mechanics. We have weatherization. We have line and grade classes. I mean, things that you would think would be being taught at a college level or being taught at high schools. So for your general idea, if you're not involved with your high schools, they may be doing more than you're aware of. So getting involved is important. We have 139 certified NCCER instructors that I work with throughout our state that are secondary and post-secondary. So going all the way from the Aleutian chain all the way up to the top of Alaska and Barrow, 139 instructors. So we are utilizing NCCER to a great strength in our state, and our students are getting industry recognized credentials. We've completed over 14,000 modules since 2013. So people are going through the training, they're getting credentials, and they're going to work. It's industry who has to buy in. You know, we're making sure that we're producing students who can pass drug tests, who can do your work keys tests, score the math scores, and go to work. They want to work with their hands, but industry has to be willing to employ them and continue to train them. They're not going to come to you fully ready and be able to do everything you're expecting them to do. So if you're not willing to invest in them, they're not going to turn out the way that you want them to. So I mean, it's a give and take relationship. You have to be willing to invest in education, and if you're not, then you know, you can't expect the school system to produce you that student who's going to go to work to the full capacity. We have a bridge to work model. We set up internships and practicums where students get to go on the job and do some training, or we have industry go to the school. So last year we had a roofing company come in and they showed the students how to pitch a roof on the dugout and to, I guess you want to put the shingles down. So it's little relationships like that. We also have school to work apprenticeships, so they're going directly right into apprenticeship outside of graduating high school. So it's just kind of, they don't have to apply for the program, they get direct entered. So those work well. Again, this is kind of off of Ralph's model. We work with a lot of the same associations. So we have the Alaska Association for Career and Technical Education, Skills USA. We have the Alaska Apprenticeship and Training Coordinators Association. We have the Department of Education, AWIB, Alaska Workforce Investment Board. That is huge for our state. They've identified lots of priority occupations, specifically in construction. And when I say construction, I mean construction, your general idea of construction, oil and gas, mining, and maritime. We have a lot of industry that has cross-cutting skills. So if you're training a welder can work in any of those areas. So understanding that construction, I mean the vast idea of construction. We work with the University of Alaska system. We have campuses all over our state. We have one technical college, which is AvTech, Ilisavik College, which is a native college up in Barrow, Alaska. And then we have regional training centers. All of our regions have training centers. So if a student can't get to a university campus, they can go to a regional training center and get hands-on training, whether it's welding or carpentry. We have home build programs. We have high school students who are building homes. We have a program in Juneau, Alaska, and a program in Wasilla, Alaska. It takes them 2 years to produce a home, but at the end of it, the school district sells that house, and the revenue goes back into buying another plot of land and building another home. So those students are doing everything from, the foundation all the way up. So there are students who are getting these real-life skills. It's just we need industry involvement. You got to be passionate about education. We have people that are willing to work with their hands and get dirty. So obviously relationships are very important. And we have a lot of Alaska Native corporations that have construction companies. So we are talking to them and making sure that in rural Alaska, we're able to get the youth there turned on to construction and working with their Native corporation and being able to travel. And we have Native corporations who do work outside of Alaska and the lower 48. So what I mentioned earlier, our Alaska Workforce Investment Board, they identified 5 industries. I only put the 4 that are relevant to me. So construction, oil and gas, mining and maritime, and the 5th industry was healthcare. Those are the biggest employers in the state of Alaska. And out of that, we identified nine skills that go across the board that are needed in our state. You need to work with your local government. You need to work with the Department of Labor. You need to identify what the state needs, because I'm sure if you need an electrician, your partner needs an electrician. So everybody you're competing with needs the same people that you do. So everybody needs to start investing a little bit. But as you can see, electrical, we need plumbers, pipe fitters, steam fitters, welding, equipment operators, diesel mechanics, carpentry, instrumentation, millwright, and then drillers and blasters. Those are 9 areas that we've indicated as a state that we need people, and we need them bad. So over the next 5 years, we need about 25,000 people to fill that gap. Just for numbers, we only have 38,000 high school students in our state. So very, very small. I have 1,800 new students to career and technical education this year. And then I have 800 concentrators, so 800 students who have taken 1 or more construction-related CTE classes in our state. So it's not only high school students that we have to go after. We've started programs where, are you guys familiar with Build Up? AGC National used to have Build Up program. Anybody here? Very old program. We still utilize it in our state. I mean, we have engineers and contractors going into middle schools, talking to them, because we've identified that that's when they're making their decision on what they want to do. I mean, if they're going to throw out a heavy equipment operator or somebody who drives a truck for their life, for a living. So we've identified that we need to get down to a middle school level to introduce them to construction. And if we can't do that, then we've lost them. So we know that our skills gap is huge, and we've been investing all the way down to middle school. Again, these are pictures from some of my high school programs. Kind of see them a little bit. At the very top, that one's in Wasilla, Alaska. They're doing a surveying class. They're using all of the equipment. I have students who are doing pipe welding in Fairbanks, heavy equipment operating. I have them out typically in rural Alaska, but like the Bristol Bay area. And then the pictures on the other side, those are from Skills USA, our state competition last year. I have students who are doing electrical, and then I have a student who is doing, they're doing a small build. So they actually have to build a mock house. Or team build is what they call it. But yeah, I mean, they want to work in the industry, but are you willing to employ them? If they can pass a drug test and they want to work with their hands and they can read a tape measure, are you willing to invest in the rest of their education to get them to where they need to be profitable for your company? I'll leave you with that.
Thank you, Mandy. Now, a couple things that Mandy talked about. How many of you all do work-based learning opportunities for high school students with your companies? Okay, I have two. Let me tell you, if you really want your students to come in and see what it's like to work every day, work with your CTE programs within your districts to get students into work-based learning programs. The other thing that I would advise you to do is something that we have a lot of companies that help us with, are externships and summer internships, not for students, but for the teachers, to understand what needs to be taught. So if you haven't thought about doing that, work with those construction trades programs and make sure that you're getting those students into those programs. Mandy said the opportunity to make construction sexy. And I think that's a great key for us to really look at. Steve Green and Don White, our president, vice president, and I really throw really good marketing ideas out to our director of marketing, Jennifer Wilkerson, who's not here because I think she's actually using some of our ideas and coming up with some things. And so we always try to help her figure out ways that we can help make the industry appealing. And, you know, it's one of those, you have to really think about back in the 1960s, 1970s. What students are doing now is not your father's or grandfather's old shop class. We're not just building birdhouses. We're not just going out and welding barbecue pits or everything. Students are taking math, science, and English courses that correspond to their career and technical education programs. So the math, science, and English are built into these programs now to make people work ready when they leave these programs. So don't dismiss the schools that you're working with. Reach out to them. Make sure that you're making those connections. Utilize NCCER, and I think that it was fantastic that Ralph and Mandy talked about our Build Your Future campaign. There's a story, and if Jennifer was here, she would tell you the story real quick about reaching out to middle school students. We have our NCCER, our Build Your Future trading cards, because we know that baseball stars, football stars all have cards with their stats and everything on them. So we said, why not glamorize the craft professional and do the same exact thing? So you can pick up a deck of those when you come by our table. But the idea is to hand these out to students, to start conversations with their parents about what goes on. So Jennifer always uses the idea that she had a student who came up to her at one of our career fairs and said, you know, I like playing in dirt. And he goes, can I get a job playing in dirt? Jennifer goes, yeah, you can be a heavy equipment operator. You can play dirt all day long. You can push dirt around, dig dirt up. It's fantastic. And he went back home and told his parents, he said, look, I can play in dirt all day long. And so the kid was very happy with that. Parents didn't quite understand until they came and they said, oh, yes, you can play in dirt. This is fantastic. Look at those student organizations. Look at Skills USA. Go back to the very first things that we talked about before this presentation started. What is that purpose that you want schools to be able to do to fulfill those skills gap that you need? So I'm going to open it up to questions. We have about 6 or 7 minutes for questions. Anybody have any questions, comments? Yes, sir, in the glasses.
At least you didn't say the bald guy in the back. But that could be it. So, you know, Harvard said that you don't got to go to college to have a good life and be successful, and that's cool, but they're Harvard. If you guys were to say that, that would obviously be just a little bit self-serving, because obviously, you know, that's what you want to put out there. So I'm kind of wondering, how do we get through those two worlds to meet? Because quite frankly, you're right, and this might be sacrilegious or heretical, you can say, because I'm from a post-secondary institution, but you know, not everybody should go to college, okay? You can be successful and happy without going to college, but if you're a parent here, and I suspect some of you are, how do we get that message to the parents? Because every parent that I know says, I want my kid to go to college. And the kids are like, okay, well, thanks. How do we get that, how do we get the two of them so that it has some credibility, so that it's not self-serving, and so that it's not some sort of authentication from the ivory tower, but it's actually you people talking to parents and getting the word out to parents that says, hey, your kid wants to go play in dirt all his life, you know, this could be possible.
Well, I think it goes back to what is that pathways that a student really wants to choose. And that pathway in the construction industry can be going from a high school program straight on their tools, going into an apprentice program, going into a technical school in that post-secondary, getting that certificate or credential that they need, or even going on to that 4-year track, going into a construction management program. But the best part about that pathway is there are on and off ramps all during that time that people can go and move forward. So how many areas can you actually go into, start off as a helper, and possibly, if you have the motivation to be able to do something, within 20 years own your own company? Not a lot of areas you can do that. So it's understanding what these pathways are and where this is. This is just not one stop that you're going to be doing this the rest of your life. Ralph and Mandy, do you want to say anything about that?
Well, I think that college programs kind of have to be more open to not just giving credit for the classes that they have. I think it needs to be like a certificate or a certification-based training. I mean, because a lot of the industry doesn't care if you have a 4-year degree. They want to know that you are able to go to work. So I think the college kind of has to be open-minded in the sense that the credits don't count towards much unless that person is determined to get a degree, but they should be getting industry-recognized credentials when they're going through your courses as well. So if they didn't have the opportunity to take a CTE class in high school, that they can take a CTE class at a college level and still get the completion they need to go to work in a short period of time.
And one of those, and you'll have to realize it too, that within the next 10 years, 65% of the jobs that are going to be out there are going to require an associate's degree or some sort of certification. 65% of the jobs. So really pushing students to that 4-year track is a fantastic opportunity. I wouldn't be where I was if I didn't go to college, but the simple fact is, it's not for everybody, and knowing what those pathways are very successful. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
You know, I take a stab at this gentleman's comment. I guess the message I would send to the parents is we're going to train your youngster and give them a skill and send home with a paycheck every week instead of ending up with $40,000 or $80,000 or $90,000 in student debt and still don't have a job. I mean, that's the message. You know, the thing that we have, the challenge that we have in our industry, and a lot of these classes, this is great stuff that you folks are talking about. But don't give me a kid who's got to spend 15 minutes in a skid loader and show up on the job site, thinks he's a Class A operator, and ought to be running the crew. You know, we got to instill in this that it's a learning process. There's great opportunity, but my God, you've got to learn something first, and you're not going to get it sitting in a classroom. You're not going to get it framing up a porch. I mean, it's a great start, because we've got to start these youngsters as trainees, as laborers, and get them into a training program. It's the only way it's going to work. And that's the challenge in the educational process. Is they're not going to step out of high school or a 2-year college program ready to run a crew and understand everything that's going out on the job site. So, you know, that's the message we've got to try. In my mind, at least, that's the message we've got to try.
And that's the importance of what industry brings to those programs, is that voice, going really into the classroom and saying, you know what, this is real life. Without that experience, this is where you're going to be. You're not going to come in and be the CEO in the first day. That's not the way it is. Although this generation that we have really has this mentality that I'm going to do anything that you have. Ralph?
Actually, I'd like to tie both of those comments back together when it comes to having that conversation with parents or educators about the college discussion. I always change it back to them and talking about college preparedness. And getting them prepared for industry or college is more the key than what are they going to do in college. Because that preparedness level, even when they graduate from high school, they're spending, and then it's coming back on their own dollars and their own wallets on all that remediation work that I talked about we have to deal with on the apprenticeship side. And to your point, that is something we bang our heads against the wall every single time we're within the education environment, is to explain to them that, you know what, that is a great start, building patios or putting roofs on houses, but you're also teaching residential and you're trying to come to us in the commercial side. It doesn't work in that direction. It'll actually work the other direction, because that's going to be one heck of a house when you get them a commercial contractor building or carpenter. But it's all about the preparedness and getting them ready for that next level that makes them employable. That's what I usually try to bring it back down to, is the employability, not necessarily, oh yeah, little Johnny or Janie's going to go to college. Well, that's great. Are they prepared to?
Time for one more question. One more question. Yes, sir.
How do you deal with the challenges of the bigger cities? I know Mr. Moore mentioned that in the bigger cities it's a little more, well, it sounded like it's a little more challenging. I'm out in New York, so some of these high schools and community colleges, which are glorified high schools, and I did some teaching for just a little while in a community college, and it's kind of outrageous, the skills that these kids don't have. So can you imagine that these programs are going to work in the high schools in New York City, or let's say Chicago, or even in some of these community colleges? How do you work with those types of situations? And I know you mentioned the farm, and we have that same attitude. Yeah. We'll take those youngsters from upstate New York, the ones who are up in the morning and go to work all day. When we get downstate, it's a little different.
Surprisingly, to get them engaged, it is jumping through more hoops, but it kind of goes back to Mandy's comment earlier about making it sexy. So what we've started doing is a heavy equipment rodeo that we hold at our ACE Leadership High School in Albuquerque, and it really gets them thinking of a whole different world that they never thought of before by understanding that. And this year it's even morphing to where we're bringing out our competitors, quite frankly, from the unions and the open shop side in the apprenticeship world, and they're actually going to be providing hands-on projects for the students there that are there for an employment fair plus a heavy equipment rodeo. So we've used the heavy equipment as the eye candy, but when they're there, last year we had over 200 students actually physically get on either a backhoe or a Mini X or simulator, and it got them re-engaged on a world they didn't even know was available, because it is a challenge. I mean, those of us that grew up outside, we were on a tractor at 7 years of age cleaning corrals and stuff, whereas these folks in the inner city, they aren't accustomed to that world. They haven't been introduced, so we brought the world to them to introduce them.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have run out of time, and I thank you for being here today. Enjoy the rest of the conference, and we'll be around to answer some questions if you have them. Thank you very much.